Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Heat Check. I'm John Devine. This is Anthony Chang, our Miami Herald beat writer. Um, hasn't had a lot of actual games to talk about in the past week, but we have had a lot of things to talk about. Starting with our buddy Jimmy Butler, who, as you guys remember, there were rumors that leaking out that they wouldn't mind too much making a deal if the right one came along, but it would have to. And Jimmy, of course, being Jimmy, took it to his own level. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the game after all the trade speculation came out, I think it was against Toronto last Thursday or Friday. He wore orange. He wore orange braids. He had been kind of changing colors between his braids in different games. And the day before the game, there's an additional Shams report that said that the Suns are also a team Jimmy's interested in. So the next day, Jimmy shows up with orange braids. We ask him about it. He says there's nothing behind it. It's just the color he chose. But we know Jimmy, right? He likes to troll. And then against the Pistons on Monday, he wears shoes with that are a yellow and blue, Golden State colors, which is a team that's also reportedly on Jimmy's list. So we're seeing some just, I don't know if Jimmy's having fun with it. I don't know if Jimmy's trying to send a message, right? Obviously, he won't say that on the record. But it is interesting. We also have some of his friends on Twitter that are and hang out with him, kind of pointing it out too, like, "Oh, Jimmy's shoes, how nice they are." This kind of like being sarcastic. So there's definitely something there. Again, is Jimmy is he just having fun with it and just joking about it, or is there something more calculated behind it that we don't know with certainty, but it is definitely something to monitor. I guess what will Jimmy wear Dallas Mavericks colored socks the next game? I don't know. But it is interesting as the noise continues to grow louder. As the trade deadline is still, 6-7 weeks away, but as we get closer, unless the Heat come out and say Jimmy's going to be on this team for the rest of the season, if the Heat don't, quiet the noise, I think it's only going to get louder.
So who's the bigger troll in South Florida sports? Is it Tyreek Hill or is it Jimmy?
Because it's a good one.
Just so you know, Tyreek Hill came out today and started trolling around on his X account, saying pretty much that he's tired and maybe he should stop. But
I don't know. I feel like Jimmy's an all-time troll. I mean, just the way even before with the Heat, right? Just the way he does certain things just to get, I don't know, the emo Jimmy, the dreadlock Jimmy. I mean, those are great lengths.
Jimmy, yes.
Yeah, we haven't seen that from Tyreek yet. I mean, maybe it's coming. Maybe something like that's coming. But he goes to great lengths to troll. Where all of a sudden the NBA and ESPN, all the national networks have to use those photos from Media Day for all their promos and all their game stuff. I would give the edge to Jimmy, but that is a good question. Tyreek, is a pretty big troll himself.
So lost in all of this Jimmy drama is the fact that he's really been balling out lately.
Yeah.
What was it? Monday night he had a triple-double in overtime, and it wasn't like he just skated by and had 10 points, 10 rebounds, or 10 assists. He kind of went off. You were at that game, yes? Tell me a little bit about what he was doing that game and what the team looks like when he's in that mode.
Yeah, when Jimmy's aggressive, I mean, they didn't win that game, but when Jimmy's that aggressive on offense and takes that many shots and is that effective, the Heat usually win. There's a really high win percentage when Jimmy plays like that. They obviously lost that one. Detroit shot 50% from three. They made a lot of shots. He lost in overtime, but I mean that was Jimmy's best game of the season by far. It's one of his best regular season performances ever since joining the Heat, I would say. I think according to the game score, which Basketball Reference does this thing where they assign a game score to each player's performance using a complicated metric. I believe that was his highest regular season game score since joining the Heat. Was it his best game? You could debate that, but according to that number, it was his best in a Heat uniform. So that's impressive, especially at 35 years old. And here we are, some people are questioning whether he could still do it. Can he do that every night? No. But it is a shame that they wasted a performance like that, right? Against bad Pistons team that was missing two starters, lost its backup center, Isaiah Stewart, early in the game. He had 3 days off before that game, and they still lost despite Jimmy's, really big stat line. So yeah, it is a shame they wasted that, but it does kind of show you Jimmy still has that, right? Can he do that every night? No. But he's playing well. I know there's been some performances people will point to and say, where was the opener when he had like 3 or 4 points, and Charlotte on the back to back where his back was bothering him, he didn't do much. But the bottom line is he's shooting a career best 55% from the field this season. He's efficient. His points, are lower. His right now his average 19.4 points a game would be his lowest since joining the Heat. But as far as efficiency, it's his most efficient shooting season of his career so far. And again, for a 35-year-old, going to be 36 in 9 months. That's impressive because usually efficiency is the first thing to go for aging stars. So I definitely think Jimmy still has it. And if anything, I know it was a loss, but if anything, Monday was encouraging because it shows you that.
Well, a couple things that I drew from that. One, in a packed Eastern Conference outside of like Boston, maybe, you can't afford to give up wins that when you look at the end of the season and all of a sudden you're a 6, 7, or 8 seed and you're a game or two out from maybe being a 3, 4, 5 seed or even hosting a first round series, those are the kinds of things that come back and get you. And, losing like that in overtime and wasting a performance like that is something that can come back and haunt you. So, to be honest with you, that means you need to steal a game you have no business winning further on down the road to wash that stink away. The other thing is, with Jimmy and looking at that performance, where Jimmy scores is not where everybody else scores. And when the defense has to cover in certain zones in certain areas that they don't normally have to, I think that's part of the reason that offense looks a little different and they score in the 120s in that case. But like I said, it's what they called in the old days the straw that stirs the drink. And he's that straw. The attention that he gives or the attention that he gets. The defense, let's not even talk about the rebounding, because they're not a very big team. If you get double-digit boards from this guy who's a swingman small forward, that makes life easier for everybody else. Also part of the reason, and we can delve into this, that now, we kept talking about it, but they're a top 10 offense and defense now. That kind of snuck up on us. Before we were like, oh, well, they need to do this. This is what they need to do. So if at this point they're a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense in the NBA, but the results in terms of wins and losses aren't showing it, what's true? I mean, you always hear your record is what you say it is.
Right.
Will it come back and correct itself? Or is it a mirage that they're top 10 in each?
Look, they're in a really elite class right now. There's 5 teams in the league with a top 10 offense and a top 10 defensive rating. The Thunder, the Grizzlies, the Celtics, the Cavaliers, and the Heat. The Thunder and the Grizzlies are currently the top 2 teams in the West. The Celtics and the Cavs are currently the top 2 teams in the East. And then there's the Heat, who are just hovering around 500 in that class. So it is a weird thing. Do I think the Heat are in that class? No, I don't. I don't think that. But I do think it's a sign that things are probably a little better than most out there think with the Heat. I think they're probably a little better than their record. And I'll give you some numbers to kind of prove that. They have 6 losses decided by 3 points or less. That is the most in the NBA, tied with the Raptors. Again, those are losses, bottom line. It doesn't matter how many they lose by. But those are games that could have gone either way. I mean, you look at that Detroit game in overtime, right? A couple of days ago. Look at the first Detroit game in Detroit when Spo called that timeout. Obviously, it cost them the game. There's been a lot of games that have been by a final possession. They are 1-6 in games decided by 3 points or less. That's obviously not good. Usually that evens itself out. But that kind of shows you the fact that they're even 12-10 with that 1-6 record in those close games. That's a little impressive. They just split those games. All of a sudden, they're 15-9, right? I think 15-9 if they split those games. Which
you said they were 12-10, so they'd be.
They're 13-11 right now. They're 13-11 right now.
Oh, 13-11. If you split those 6, they would be 16-8.
Yeah, I mean they'd be in probably the 3rd seed in the East right now. So, again, do I think they're like on the Celtics Cavaliers level? No, I don't at this point. But it is interesting when you look in a little closer in context around these results. Again, top 10 offense, top 10 defense. They probably have lost a few games they should have won, right? They also have only 3 double-digit losses, so they haven't been blown out much. One of them was the season opener, which is a complete dud against Orlando, which we covered that week. And then the other 2 were Denver, which the Heat never play well in Denver, and Jimmy left that game early in the first quarter. And also the Boston game on the second night of back-to-back without Jimmy. So 2 of them were basically without Jimmy. And Boston went nuts from 3. Right. And the Heat, while they only have 3 double-digit losses, they have 7 double-digit wins. So they've, again, I think that's why these metrics of advanced, offensive rating, defensive rating, net rating, it kind of is a good indicator of where a team stands, because if you just look at the record, there's more context to it. Again, I know that's the bottom line. That's what your seed is based on. But I do think the Heat are better than their record at this point.
Okay, if we're saying the Heat's better than its record, and they're 13-11, where do they find? I guess where do they find it to either separate so that they don't play these close games? I remember a couple years ago they played a lot of close games and won. So the law
a record number. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's true, and that's something to point out. That's a good point. Last year, even I think the year before for sure, when they set the record for most clutch games, or second most clutch games, I think, in NBA history, they had won most of those games. So it does even out, and that's the problem with playing a bunch of close games, which this team tends to do. You kind of make yourself vulnerable to these last-second shots. The Sabonis tip-in against the Kings when the Heat should have won that game. Again, the Eric Spoelstra timeout. Tim Hardaway getting hot from 3 in overtime, hitting 3 straight threes, and all of a sudden Detroit wins that game. You leave yourself vulnerable to that type of, kind of not fluky, but just random finish, right? So that's something the Heat have to correct. They do have some 7 double-digit wins, which I don't think they had many last year. They didn't really have many blowout wins last year, so that's encouraging that they've had a few kind of not blowout, but easier wins than just all these clutch wins. But they have to find a way to turn some of these close losses into some close wins. Again, they're 1-6 in games decided by 3 points or less. That's not great. But again, the fact that they're 13-11 with that 1-6 record is kind of impressive, because usually that would lead to you probably having a losing record.
Well, you look at it and you try and balance this thing out, and it's like, okay, I think close games take something else in your DNA that you have to do. It's a totally different game. Just like we talk about the playoffs are a different game. And it's pretty much because you have that tension all the way through. Mistakes are magnified. Things that you don't do well are magnified. Anything that goes wrong when you play close games like that. Also, your depth is important, but when you get to the last 3-5 minutes, it's not. It's like, who can you rely on?
Yeah.
Is it that they don't, unless Jimmy shows up, that they need another alpha male in there to really take charge in the last few minutes? Because I think we can say, Bam affects winning, and that's safe to say. He does, he'll switch on defense. He will rebound. He will do all sorts of things. But when you're in the last 3 minutes and you're like, I need to go get a basket.
Sure.
Well, you get that. Tyler Hero would love to do that, but by that same token, and though he's really expanded his game, are they going to go straight at it? Will Jimmy exhaust himself to the point that by the time he gets to late in the fourth quarter? And let's be honest, and we'll talk about him in a minute because you did a nice story on this guy today. Drew Smith playing the entire fourth quarter. What do you have in Drew Smith to the point where you're like, okay, this is my point guard for the fourth quarter?
Yeah.
You haven't, we talk about, do you have enough for the season? Now the question is, do you have enough in the final 5 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Jimmy's option one, right? But I do think Tyler has lifted himself into a top option down the stretch of games. I mean, he's hit a couple game winners, I think, or important baskets in some of these close wins, and maybe not set by 3 points or less, but in these games that were clutch games that turned into wins, maybe by 5 points or 6 points. He even hit the one a couple nights ago in Detroit that sent it into overtime, right? He hit the 3 to send it into overtime. So Tyler is a clutch player. He has been for the last few years. Jimmy's obviously Jimmy. So I think they have enough, right? And Bam is a great defender. He's a guy who won on the floor late in games. it's just, again, these random things of Tim Hardaway hitting Tim Hardaway Jr. hitting three straight threes when some of those were tough shots. Eric Spoelstra calling a timeout when he didn't have one. Domantas Sabonis getting an offensive rebound and getting a tip in with no time left on the clock. Like, some of these things are just things, just random stuff, which again is my point of, you leave yourself vulnerable to these things when you play these close games, because all it takes is one mistake. And I do think over a large sample, you're usually going to be around 500 in these games because stuff isn't even out. But when it's a 7-game sample and you could be 1-6, you could be 6-1. In that case, if you're 6-1, you're probably not as good as your record is, right? Because you're winning all these close games. And in this case, I think the Heat are better than their record. Now, someone could point to, well, the Heat have been relatively healthy for most of the season. They have faced teams missing some of the best players, right? Like Kevin Durant wasn't there with the Suns when the Heat beat them in Miami. The Cavs are without Mobley for the second half. The Raptors without Scotty Barnes last week when the Heat played them in Miami. There have been a few of those where the Heat have gotten lucky as far as just with health, right? The Heat have been relatively healthy. They should probably be better than 13-11. They've played the fewest games in the league, which that's going to catch up to them. They're going to have a bunch of these 3 games in 4 nights, back-to-backs coming up, which again makes it tougher to win. So they should have taken more advantage, I think, of this portion of the schedule. I think it's a shame that they're 13-11, just kind of around 500. Not a terrible position to be, but based on their schedule so far, based on their net rating, their offensive rating, defensive rating, they should probably have at least a few more wins.
They're also 13-11 after a hot streak. They won 4 out of 5.
Right.
So before that, they were below 500. So let's hope it doesn't. Yeah, because you're right. If the schedule, and we always keep talking about what a Heat hallmark is, its depth, and that will carry some of that. But if you're playing all these close games, I love the never say die attitude, but sometimes you need to bank those wins when you can get them. So I spoke about them a couple minutes ago. Explain these people. Look, every week, the way the Heat works and the way Spo works, he rides a hot hand. We discover guys every year. We can even go back. We can even go back to the days of Isaac Costa. They always find guys. Now it seems like they found Drew Smith, somebody they've invested a lot of time in, and it looks like it's finally paying off. Because you can't necessarily look at the numbers and go, oh, look, Drew Smith is averaging double digits. He's got like 6 assists in like 20 minutes a game. What is it that is making Drew Smith effective? Tell the people who are just looking at stats why Spo's playing this guy over and over.
It's mainly because of his defense. And I think every year the Heat try to not win with their offense, but they try to kind of see what they have on offense at the beginning of a season, whether it's they change the offense and they see, if maybe they could score more points, have a better offense after they've had a bottom 10 offense for the last 2 years. And the offense has been better this year. But I think their success lately, minus that Detroit game, has been because their defense has been better than it was earlier in the season. They have this core, it's been the same thing for the last 5 years. This is the 6th season of this core. They win behind their defense. They're never going to be, even though they're a top 10 offense right now, I know, they're never going to be an elite offense. They can be an elite defense. We've seen that, right, in the Jimmy Butler era. So I think it's because Drew Smith's defense, he's very good. He's already been used to guard Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Cade Cunningham. They're picking up Cade full court in Detroit a few days ago. And their defense has just been a lot better when he's been on the court. They have been, I put it here in the story, in the last 6 games, which Drew Smith, he was out of the rotation before playing in these last 6 games, playing double-digit minutes in each of these last 6 games. When he's been on the court during that time, they've allowed 96.9 points per 100 possessions, which would rank first in the NBA among teams this season. When he hasn't been on the court, they've allowed 113.8 points per 100 possessions, which would be the 19th best defense in the league this season. So, again, is that all him? No. But he has made a huge impact on the defensive end. He had 6 steals in Detroit. He's had a few other multi-steal performances during this span of games. So it's been really impressive. And then it just helps that he's shooting also 50% on threes. Is that going to continue? No. But if he's open and leaving him open, he can knock down a shot, right? And he doesn't really commit turnovers. He kind of makes the right pass. He likes to set up guys. He doesn't need the ball, right, to be effective. He just fits. And I think Eric Spoelstra had an interesting quote that kind of explains why he's played so many minutes lately is he said he's kind of the glue that fits, and he can make any unit work. The second unit, the starters. So that's kind of exactly what he is. He just fits in any lineup, complements any lineup, and it's going to be interesting when Pelle Larsson comes back, because Pelle, the second round pick, was kind of in that role before he sprained his ankle, and ever since Pelle's been out, it's been Drew Smith, and Drew Smith has been great, right, since Pelle's been out. So I can see them at this point with the way Drew is playing, with the way they're leaning on him to play the entire quarters of games. I can't see Drew being out of the rotation at this point. Now, is it going to continue all season? Could he hit a rough patch and all of a sudden he's out of the rotation again? Sure, we've seen that from the Heat, right? Where Erik Spoelstra is not afraid to kind of change things up on the fly. But for now, he's kind of like their sixth man, which is insane to say, but he's kind of like their sixth man right now.
Okay, so a couple things about his defense. Would you say is it on ball, passing lanes, or is it overall?
It's mostly on ball, I would say. But he's off ball, he's not bad. But on ball, he's really good. I just kind of making things tough on guys.
Okay, and the second thing about that is the way this team is constructed, they don't have Pelle Larsson does it too. They don't necessarily have guys who limit the drives to the basket and the driving game.
Yep.
And so, that's one of those things where it's very effective because he does things other people can't. That's the good and bad news about depth. You have a bunch of people who do things that only they seem to be able to do. But, you need multiple things to be able to do in order to make, and it seems like that's working. Pelle Larsson, let's see if he can stop the ball. Let's see if he can slow down the opposing offense from getting in their sets, from getting in places they want to go. And I think that could be a large part of it. But these are options they have. Would you say Gabe Vincent was a similar type of person before he left?
Yeah, I think, it was funny because Erik Spoelstra was asked that question by another reporter, comparing Gabe to Drew.
Question.
No, I know. And Erik Spoelstra basically said they're totally different players. They have similar paths, right? Where undrafted, came to the G League, had knee injuries that kind of kept them out, and they had to work behind the scenes to get back. Two-way contracts. So they have similar roads, but I think Gabe was a much more explosive scorer in college, in the G League. Drew has never really been. We were talking to him last season when he was here about his path, and he was like, yeah, in high school, like, I wasn't the number one option. I didn't average 30 points a game in high school. I was still like a role guy in high school. That's kind of who he's always been. So I just think like there are similar roles right now with the Heat, like Gabe and Drew, but I think their skill sets are a little different, where Drew is just more a pure role player, buys into it, has no problem with it, and you could see it. Like, he's like the perfect glue guy right now for, like Erik Spoelstra said, any lineup. And one thing we should point out about Drew, he traded Thomas Bryant, which I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you know that, late last week. That opens up a roster spot. They have 2 open roster spots now. They have 13 players on standard contracts. They have until December 29th to add a 14th player, because you can only go up to 2 weeks with fewer than 14 players on the roster. It's not a lock yet, but it seems like with the way Drew's playing, it seems like Drew's going to be promoted to a standard contract. He's on a 2-way deal right now. Promoting him to a standard contract, obviously, is good for him. It's kind of a reward for how he's been playing, but also it means he can play in the playoffs. 2-way contract guys can't play in the playoffs. And based on the big role Drew is playing right now, they're going to need him in the playoffs if they get there, right? So it would make sense to move him to that standard contract.
Okay. I know last week we were talking about Nico.
Yeah.
And then he rose up, had this really, really good game or a couple good quarters. So. But it, and I keep thinking about it, and I always parallel, because South Florida teams we come across. The Heat and the Dolphins remind me they have lots of pieces and lots of parts, but it's whether they have complete parts. That you saw a glimpse of what Nico could do,
right?
But you also understand why he had been out of the rotation for a while. And it's like, it's not like football where you go, okay, now you're on offense, now you're on defense. You have to play both ways. And I give Spo a lot of credit because it is hard, and that's why we get off to slow starts here with the Heat every year. He's got to go in the lab, figure out what seems to work, and then go from there. And then when they adjust, he has to adjust to the adjustment. So and you have people talk about, hey, we should play Pell Larson. They play Pell Larson, turned his ankle. No one was saying, hey, we should play Drew Smith. But now it's going to be, hey, we can't get Drew Smith out of here. And, all of a sudden, you may see someone clamoring for the first round pick. When are we going to see with more of him? And why put Nico in? Or put both of, put Bam in, or have a big front line, see what that does. People are always going to clamor for it. But I think it's a meritocracy here where he watches practice. And I know not every NBA team goes, hey, practice is practice, get your shots up. I am of a firm belief that the Heat, more than most teams, looks at how you practice, how you put your work in, and you earn your minutes on the practice court.
For sure. And I think
wrong. You see it.
No, you're right. And I think Spo's really good at that as far as just he's gonna adjust on the fly, right? We see it every season. The rotation usually looks a lot different on day one than it does even mid-season or at the end of the season. He changes from game to game, from week to week, from month to month. We've already seen that in the first 2 months of the season. Nico and Terry were starters to begin the season. Now Nico's pretty much out of the rotation, and Terry's playing off the bench, and kind of his minutes fluctuate from game to game. Drew Smith wasn't in the rotation to begin the season. Now he's, again, their sixth man. Haywood Highsmith had a few DNP CDs early in the season. Now he's their starting power forward. This is going to continue. Again, will Drew continue to play heavy minutes off the bench all season? I can't guarantee that, because I don't even think Eric Spoelstra can guarantee that. It's going to depend on a lot of things. Could Khalil Ware all of a sudden be played 15 minutes a game moving forward, in a month? Yeah, sure. I mean, Kevin Love has kind of been played off the floor in some matchups. And we might see more of Khalil Ware, especially now with Thomas Bryant gone. So I think the Heat rotation remains fluid. We know Bam, Jimmy, and Tyler are starters. Other than that, I don't know if anybody's locked into that starting lineup. I would not be surprised if in a couple weeks there's a new starting power forward, or Duncan Robinson moves back to the bench. With the way Eric Spoelstra works, based on his history, he's going to continue to make changes in search of the best formula.
And I was going to say Duncan Robinson is another one that goes in and out.
Yeah.
Before I forget, I was also thinking about the Suns. If the Suns wanted Jimmy, they're only one of three teams. Just a reminder for the people out there, they're only one of three players they could really get from that. Because of, if I'm not mistaken, because of the first apron,
you
have to go dollar for dollar.
Sure.
He makes what? North of 45 million?
45, 48, something north of 45.
And if I'm not mistaken, for the Suns, that means Devin Booker, and I don't see how the heck you can't pry Devin Booker.
No.
You've got Kevin Durant, who they wanted years ago, they didn't get, and then you have Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal's a fine player. You would be trading one guy who has problems staying healthy with another guy who has problems staying healthy. And then the bigger problem is two guys who play the same position. Him and Tyler Hero. I mean, do you really want to try and play someone at the three? Either one of those guys. They're not quite big enough to handle. It's a smallish team anyway. So maybe there's a third team, but I don't see it. That's just me.
Yeah, and the Suns, to your point, are a second apron team. So they are having more restrictions. They can't even combine salaries in it. Like you can say, well, they could do Grayson Allen another salary to make the money work. They can't combine salaries in a trade because they're a second apron team. So it has to be one of those three players in the deal. And like you said, they're not trading Devin Booker for a 35-year-old Jimmy who wants a max contract. Kevin Durant, while the Heat would probably do that deal, I can't see the Suns trading Kevin Durant for Jimmy Butler, right? If they're trading for Jimmy Butler, it's to add to a core with Kevin Durant. And Bradley Beal, the Heat kind of didn't want him a few years ago because he's his injury history, his play has kind of declined a bit, and he has that no trade clause, which was the biggest deal there. The Heat did not want to take on that no trade clause because that is really unique in the NBA. Not many players have that. And honestly, I think at this point, Tyler Hero is probably a better version of Bradley Beal, right? Younger version too. Yeah. So the only way I could see that working is if, like you said, if there's a third or fourth team involved, and Bradley Beal has to approve the trade, right? Because he has a no trade clause again. If he approves the trade and goes to, let's say, San Antonio, and all of a sudden the Spurs are trading picks and a couple young players to the Heat, maybe that's how it works. But just a simple Suns Heat trade, I just don't see it. Unless there's something we don't know with Kevin Durant asking for a trade behind the scenes, which I don't think that's the case. I just don't see that happening.
So here's the letter to Jimmy. Dear Jimmy, those orange shoes are probably going to match up with your Heat uniform instead of the Suns uniform.
They match Bernie. They match Bernie. How about that? They
Exactly.
match Bernie.
They match Bernie's hair. Because
yeah.
I don't see. Look. Andy Ellisberg is a genius when it comes to math. Give him all the credit in the world.
The best in the business at it. If anybody can make it work, he can.
That's a lot. That's a lot of decimal points to be moving back and forth.
Yep.
That's just me.
Yeah. No, it's and like we said last week, as we covered last week, this is all fun and all, but this is a very complex situation that if a trade does happen before the deadline in February, it's not going to be a simple one. It's going to be pretty complex. Probably going to include a third team, a fourth team, maybe. That's why I still think the most likely scenario is he's probably here for the whole season, and then the off season, then they'll figure things out, right? Whether he opts in, opts out, what do he do with his salary if he opts in? But I think it's going to be too complicated to find a trade that works, and to find a trade that's a good enough return for the Heat to do that. Again, they don't do those type of deals. The Heat aren't going to get better if they trade Jimmy Butler. It might make them better in the long run, right? If they get picks and all that, but they're not getting better this season. So that basically means them punting on the season to a certain extent. And I think it's going to take a lot for the Heat to do that. And I just don't know if that's out there.
And you're looking and you're saying, okay, you're in the Miami Heat front office. You're looking, and we've gone over the same stats: top 10 offense, top 10 defense. Yeah. 1 and 6 and 3 points or fewer. And all of a sudden you go, look, we are half a step from being 16 and 8 right now. A 667 winning percentage. We can live with that. Now you're going to shake up the apple cart for that. And let's be honest, since Pat Riley has arrived, 30 years ago? They don't play for let's look down the road. They're playing to win right now. So you're asking somebody to change their DNA overnight in hopes of. I don't see that happening either. Now, if there's something they think they can get better immediately, heaven forbid, if they think they can get Kevin Durant, maybe they think that is great because it opens everything up. Because he's a 3-point shooter who's 7 feet.
Yeah.
I can see that. But, it's, like I said, Andy Ellisberg will have his work cut out for him. That whole front office would have theirs cut out for him. But, don't sell them short. We've seen years where I still remember that game way, way, way back when Rex Chapman and 8 guys who we never heard of,
the Bulls,
Jordan in the 72-10 season. So they won't sit still. If nothing else, they're not going to sit still. I know there are 2 distinct groups of people who go, he's not doing enough, and then he's doing too much. So he's the one who's got to thread the needle. That's why they pay him all that money. That's why his name's on the court. And that's why we're sitting here talking about him instead of us, and that's fine. So
that's well said. And look, and say what you want about Pat and what he's done recently, right? And not making moves and bringing back this core. They've been to 2 finals in the last 5-6 years, 3 Eastern Conference Finals. Yeah, they haven't won a championship, but it's been one of the more successful, probably second most successful eras in Heat history behind the Big 3, even though they haven't won a championship. So there's something to be said about that. And again, trading Jimmy Butler is putting an end to that era, which, yeah, it's been 6 years. I mean, it wouldn't be shocking for the era to end, whether it's middle of this season or in the off season. But it's not an easy move to make, I guess is my point.
Right. And just for you people out there and all you naysayers, name me a more stable franchise.
Right.
Consistently stable. Yeah, now some people say, well, if you're in the middle and you're treading that line of mediocrity, then you can never swing big. Okay, you've seen people swing big. Look at the process in Philadelphia. I don't see any NBA Finals appearances in Philadelphia lately. Boston did swing some, but okay, look at the Nets. The Nets put their big 3 together where they decided to get Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, didn't work. Or you can say Kevin Durant, did not work. So
yeah. Look at the Suns right now. The Suns right now last year weren't great, even with those 3. The Lakers, LeBron and AD. Yeah, they won a championship, I guess, but just recently they haven't been that great. So it's not that simple.
The only place I would say was the Spurs, but even they had to go. They went down a little bit, and now they have Wembanyama. But even that would be the place I would always hold up. Pre-Wembanyama and pre that lousy year they had. That's who you would hold up and say these guys are always at a certain level. They always will be. You know who's in the front office. You know what's going to happen. But you take those two out of the equation, I can't find anybody else. So
yeah,
we'll see how this goes. Before we go, they've had some time off because of the Cup. They get back to work on Friday, and then the schedule gets a little busier. So we'll take a look at that. We know the holidays are coming up as well. The Heat do not play on Christmas, correct?
They do not. They play Friday, Saturday, and Monday. So 3 and 4 nights coming up.
Yes. So that's one of the things that shows what the NBA thinks, because they like to, put these guys on Christmas Day and make their lives miserable. And we know the players hate it, but it's always nice to see your home team playing on Christmas.
I won't complain about that myself.
Nor should you. So at this point, we're going to wrap this up. So we're going to wish you guys a Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you too, Anthony. Thank you. Enjoy your time at home for a change for that holiday. And we will get back to you next week. During the holidays, it will not come out on Christmas. That much I can tell you. But we look forward to talking more Heat with you. I'm John Devine. This is Anthony Chang. And for Heat Check, enjoy your holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.